I never imagined a single phone call could change the rest of my life. The phone rang in the middle of a sweltering afternoon, and just as I was about to pick it up, I realized my son, Michael, was talking to someone on speakerphone by mistake. I froze when I heard his voice, as cold as steel. "I'm going to push that old man out of the company. He's useless now." I thought I had misheard. That old man, was that me? His father? The man who had worked for 45 years to build the company he now managed, reduced to a useless old man. On the other end, the sharp, shrill laughter of Linda, his wife, echoed. "It's about time, honey. Your dad is living in another century. If you don't do it, the company will die with him." I still remember every word, every beat of that cruel laughter. The room seemed to freeze, despite the scorching sun pouring through the window. I stood motionless, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening as they meticulously planned my removal from the life's work I had built with my own blood and sweat. Michael continued, in the monotone voice of someone negotiating a business deal. "We'll tell him to retire, that it's for the best for his health. He doesn't need to know about the changes." Hearing that, I felt a sharp pain in my heart. My son, he had forgotten that before I was a boss, I was the father who carried him on my shoulders, who spent sleepless nights so he would never lack a plate of food or shoes for school. I don't remember how long I sat there after the call ended. I only know that the ticking of the wall clock marked the rhythm of a countdown, the countdown of my days at that company. My office, a place that had always felt like home, suddenly felt foreign. On the wall, the family photos weighed on me like stones. In one, a little Michael was laughing with a toothless grin, sitting on my shoulders. In another, on his wedding day, Emily, my wife, hugged both of us, her gaze as warm as a blessing. Now, the two people I had loved most in my life were gone. One passed away, the other slowly fading from my heart. I stood up and walked slowly to my desk, the same one that had witnessed so many sleepless nights of calculations, of signing every contract with my calloused hands. I caressed the cold, smooth wooden surface and remembered the early days when the company was nothing more than a small workshop filled with dust and the smell of paint. I started with $50 in my pocket and a dream that, until that moment, I believed I was building for my son. Now, that same dream was being appraised by him. I poured myself a glass of liquor and drank it in one gulp, tasting nothing but bitterness. In my mind, only Emily's voice resonated, as if she were whispering in my ear. "Honey, don't let them trample on your kindness." I looked at her photograph and nodded slightly. No, I wouldn't let them turn me into a ghost in my own life. But I wasn't going to scream or cry either. I had taught my son that in business, the smartest one knows when to stay silent. This time, I would teach him that lesson again, but in a father's way. Before we continue, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and tell us where you're listening from in the comments below. I remember the day I decided to open my first small carpentry workshop as if it were yesterday. I was only 26 years old, exactly $50 in my pocket, and a wife who trusted me more than anyone in the world. Emily, she used to say, "William, if you work with your heart, the wood will obey your hands." I carried those words with me my entire life. At first, the workshop was nothing more than 4 dilapidated walls and an old table saw I bought from a neighbor. But in our eyes, it was the future. Every morning I would get up before dawn, make Emily a cup of coffee, and start sawing, sanding, and varnishing every plank of wood. My hands were swollen and covered in calluses, but I never complained. I wasn't doing it out of ambition, but for a simple desire. That my son, who hadn't been born yet, wouldn't have to live like I had. Emily, who was pregnant with Michael at the time, her belly already round and tight, would sit by my side every night to help me with labels, bookkeeping, and accounts. Every now and then, she would look up and smile tenderly. Our son will grow up among the smell of wood and sweat, but also among the smell of love. Right, honey? When Michael was born, I held him in my arms in the middle of the workshop. The sawdust particles floating in the sunbeam were like thousands of tiny stars. I kissed his forehead and vowed, "I will do everything I can to give you a better future than your father's." That oath stayed with me for the following decades, turning into sleepless nights, trips to deliver orders in the middle of the night, and the aches that formed in my back from lifting heavy loads. I thought that if I sacrificed a little more, Michael would have everything: a good education, quality clothes, and not a single worry. Over time, the small workshop grew into a company. I went from being a craftsman to a manager, and finally, an owner. But deep down in my heart, I never felt like a boss. I was just an old carpenter who still believed that every product was a part of himself. And Emily, She was still the silent hands behind the scenes, keeping everything in order and full of warmth. When Michael was little, he used to run around the workshop, playing and asking questions. "Dad, why does the wood smell so good?" I would laugh and reply, "Because it's alive, son. Wood has a soul, just like people." I never imagined that one day, that same boy would forget the soul of what his father had created. Now, looking back, I understand that perhaps I taught him too well how to make money, but forgot to teach him to value effort and love. I gave him everything, except my time. When the company opened new branches, I hardly ever came home. Every time Emily pleaded with me, "Just stay home for one day. Michael wants to go to the park with his father," I would always reply, "Next time, honey. I have to take care of this contract." I thought that as soon as I closed that deal, I would have time for my son, but that next time never came. Looking back, I see those years as a beautiful and cruel time. Beautiful, because I loved with all my soul. Cruel, because that same love blinded me. I built a solid building, but I left the most important room empty, the one where a father and son could sit together, just to say, "I love you, and I'm proud of you." When the company started turning a profit, I thought I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But in reality, that was just the beginning of another journey, that of a man who didn't know how to stop. Every morning, I was still the first to arrive and the last to leave the workshop. The younger employees looked at me with admiration, and I could only smile. They didn't understand that I didn't work for praise, but because I was afraid that if I stopped, everything would collapse. Michael grew up having dinners without a father. When I got home, he was already asleep. When I left for work, he was still dreaming. Emily used to tell me that every time he heard a noise at the door, he would run and ask, "Is Dad back?" And when he saw it was just the wind, he would go back silently, hugging his old teddy bear. Hearing that hurt my soul, but I consoled myself by thinking, he'll understand one day. When he sees everything I've created for him, he'll be proud. When Michael turned 12, the company reached its first significant revenue milestone. I had promised Emily we would take a few days of vacation, but I ended up canceling everything for an important contract. She didn't get angry, she just looked at me sadly. "You're winning in business, but losing in life," she said quietly. I laughed, thinking she was exaggerating. Now, looking back, I believe that sentence was a prophecy I deliberately ignored. I only felt the true weight of her words when Emily got sick. She suffered from heart failure and had to be hospitalized constantly. Every time she held my hand, she would say, "William, stop. I'm afraid that one day you'll lose everything because you don't know when to stop." But I kept making empty promises. "I just need to sign this last project." I signed it, yes. But a few months later, I lost her forever. I still remember the night of the funeral. Michael, now a grown man, hugged me and said through tears, "I promise I won't leave you alone, Dad." And I believed him. I believed in his promise. I saw in my son's eyes the image of Emily, a steady gaze, full of love. I trusted that even though she was gone, this family still had Michael. I still had a father-son love I could lean on in my old age. But I never suspected that this same love, this same faith, would become my greatest weakness. Because since I never learned to rest, it was only when others started wishing for my departure that I realized one thing. I had grown old, but I had never lived a single day for myself. After Emily's funeral, the house felt strangely empty. Every morning, I would still make 2 cups of coffee out of habit, only to realize there was no one sitting across from me to smile back. The scent of white chrysanthemums from the altar mixed with the smell of the wood in the picture frames, making the room seem to hold its breath forever. The nights were so silent I could hear every tick of the clock, as if reminding me that I had just lost the most important part of my life. Michael moved in with me for a while. At that time, I considered myself lucky to still have my son by my side. He helped me organize papers, took me to dinner, and we talked about the company's growth. "You don't have to worry anymore, Dad. I can take care of it now," he would say with a confident voice. I felt my heart find comfort. In the midst of my loneliness, at least I still had family. But, slowly, the father-son conversations became less frequent, replaced by closed-door meetings between Michael and his wife, Linda. Linda was a smart and cunning woman, but she always exuded a cold perfume. When Emily was still alive, she had once whispered to me, "That girl doesn't love Michael, she loves power." I laughed, thinking Emily was worrying too much. Now I understood. Every time Linda looked at me, her eyes seemed to be calculating what percentage of shares I had left to give her. One night, I left my office earlier than usual. The light from the living room cast a glow down the hallway, and I heard Linda whisper, "If your father agreed to sell the rest of his shares, we could expand internationally. Tell me, would you dare to ask him?" Michael was silent for a moment, and then replied, "Dad will never let it go. But if we could prove he's no longer competent." I stopped, feeling as if an invisible fist was squeezing my heart. I didn't hear the end of the sentence. I didn't need to. Half was enough to understand that Emily had been right. I was no longer a loved one, but an obstacle in their plans. That night, I sat alone on the porch and opened the notebook Emily used to leave half-written. Among the pages of cooking recipes, I found a folded note, written in her soft handwriting. "Honey, if one day I'm no longer by your side, remember that this house will only stay alive as long as there is love in it. Don't let the numbers kill you, or kill our son." I read that sentence over and over, and each time I felt a bigger lump in my throat. I thought I knew my wife, but it turned out I never really did. She had foreseen everything, my loneliness, and the greed that would grow in our son if I kept using material things to show love. The next morning I got up early, made a cup of coffee, and placed another next to Emily's portrait. "Do you see?" I whispered to her. "The boy is taking the path we feared so much, but this time I won't stay silent." Sunlight filtered through the window and illuminated her photograph. Looking at her smile, I seemed to hear her warm, familiar voice. "It's time for you to live for yourself, William." From that day on, I started paying more attention to Michael and Linda's behavior. Before, whenever I entered the meeting room, everyone would stand up to greet me, and Michael would introduce me with pride. "This is my father, the founder." But lately, when I opened the door, conversations would stop abruptly and glances would fill with a fleeting discomfort. Michael would just nod with a forced smile and continue his presentation without even inviting me to take a seat. I realized it wasn't a coincidence. It was deliberate, a way to slowly push me aside. Linda was different. She was always polite, proper, but cold as steel. "Mr. Mendoza, how are you today?" she would say, as if I were a business partner and not her father-in-law. Every time I heard her, I felt my heart sink. I didn't want to believe that my son was being manipulated by that woman, but all the signs pointed in that direction. One day I passed by the meeting room and saw Michael presenting a company restructuring plan. On the screen, I read the words, "New Strategic Direction." Below, in the notes, I managed to read "Optimize Leadership and Ensure Generational Transition." Every word was like a knife in my soul. Generational transition. They were planning to replace me, publicly and legally. They were just waiting for me to sign that document myself in the name of the common good. I stood at the door for a few minutes, watching my son speak passionately to the young shareholders. I had dreamed of seeing this scene. My son, self-assured, leading the company forward. But the pride of old was gone, replaced by a deep sense of emptiness. I no longer saw in him the boy who collected sawdust to help his father, but a man with a thirst for power so great that he had forgotten the roots of his own success. When the meeting ended, Michael saw me. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're early, Dad," he said, trying to keep a light tone. I nodded and replied slowly, "Yes, I wanted to hear where my son's company is heading." Michael forced a smile, looking away. "We're just considering some small changes to adapt to the new times." I didn't answer. I just looked at him fixedly, for a long, long time. Between us, an invisible distance grew, no longer as father and son, but as two strange colleagues talking about business. In the afternoon, I returned to my office. On the table, the old clock that Emily had given me was still ticking. Its tick-tock resonated heavily. I looked through the glass and saw Michael and Linda crossing the courtyard, talking and laughing. Their smiles were radiant, but in them I saw something alien, something as cold as the glint of steel. I sighed. I opened a drawer and took out an old notebook. I quickly wrote a few lines. "Son, I used to think the worst thing that could happen to me was seeing my life's work crumble. But no. The worst thing is seeing your own son become a stranger. I don't blame you, but it hurts, Michael. It hurts a lot." I closed the notebook and put it in the back of the drawer. Outside, the pale evening light spread across the office walls. I realized that what was fading wasn't just the daylight, but also a father's faith in the son he once believed would continue his legacy with love and not with ambition. That morning, as I was reviewing some old contracts, the phone rang. On the screen, the name David Ramirez appeared, my friend of over 20 years, and the company's chief accountant. His voice sounded hoarse, tinged with hesitation. "William, I need to see you urgently. Something's not right." I immediately arranged to meet him at the small coffee shop across from the company, the place where we used to meet when we wanted to escape the office. David arrived a few minutes late, his face tense, a far cry from his usual calm demeanor. He set his coffee on the table and lowered his voice. "Michael, your son has been asking me about the company's legal structure. He wanted to know how to redistribute the shares without your consent. I was paralyzed." "Without my consent?" David nodded slowly. "At first I thought it was just curiosity, but then he brought in a young lawyer. They asked in detail about the shareholdings, powers of attorney, and even about the possibility of proving your incapacity to manage. William, I think you should be careful." I remained silent, while the coffee in front of me grew cold. What I had just heard was like a blade sinking even deeper inside me. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure, David? Maybe he's just preparing for the future." David looked me straight in the eyes, with a gaze so honest it hurt. "I'd like to believe that. But you and I both know that Michael is not the same boy he used to be." The way he looked at me while we talked was the look of someone who is calculating, not a son worried about his father. We were silent for a moment. The sound of traffic from the street mixed with the whistling of the wind against the windows. Finally, David added, "William, you've always trusted people, especially your son. But don't forget, this company is your entire life. If you don't protect it, others will turn it into just another commodity, something to be bought and sold, like anything else." His words reminded me of a phrase Emily told me many years ago. "You love your work so much that if someone touched it, you'd feel like they were touching your own heart." Back then, she said it to advise me to learn to let go. Now, that same phrase resonated as a different kind of warning. If I wasn't careful, the first person to stab that heart would be someone with the last name Mendoza. After David left, I stayed alone. A light rain began to fall, and the drops formed smudges on the glass table, like the scars of memory. I remembered the first time I taught Michael how to sign a small contract. He was only 25, and his hand trembled as he held the pen. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "In business, you can lose money, but never lose your dignity." Now, looking back, that phrase sounded like a reminder to myself. That dignity, once betrayed, cannot be bought at any price. I decided not to confront Michael immediately. I needed to know more. I needed to prepare. If he really wanted to snatch the legacy from his father, he wouldn't do it without learning a lesson. But, unlike other times, this time I wouldn't confront him with anger. I would do it with reason, with the silence that Emily once called the weapon of a wounded father. I looked up at the window. The raindrops reflected my image in the glass. A 71-year-old man, with completely white hair and a tired, but never defeated, look in his eyes. I whispered to myself, "Michael, you are walking a more dangerous path than you think, and this time I will let you discover for yourself what it means to lose everything." That night, I returned to the company when everyone had already left. The neon light reflected on the cold tile floor, casting my thin shadow to the end of the hallway. The office was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I sat in my familiar swivel chair, in front of the filing cabinets that, for 45 years, I had guarded as if they were treasures. I opened the bottom drawer, where I kept the most important documents: the property deeds, the purchase agreements, the shares, the minutes of the meetings. Each paper contained a part of my life: sweat, tears, and even the dreams I had once held for Michael. I reviewed each folder, each signature, each clause, as if I were re-examining my own youth. It turned out that I still owned 85% of the company's shares. Michael only had 15%, the part I had given him 5 years ago, when I believed it was the best way to show a father's trust. "This is a gift for you to learn to lead," I had told him. He had smiled brightly. He had hugged me and said, "I will make you proud, Dad." That phrase now echoed in my head like a cruel irony. As he laughed, he said, "Keep this, so that in the future, father and son will have something to remind you that love can also create wealth." I smiled slightly, but the smile quickly faded. Now, Michael no longer wanted to remember those beginnings. For him, the company was just an asset, not the soul of a family. Perhaps the fault wasn't just his, but also mine, for teaching him to succeed, but forgetting to teach him to be grateful. I poured myself a glass of liquor, took a small sip, and opened another folder. The letters Emily sent me when I was on business trips. One of them, from 1995, with her soft, delicate handwriting, said, "Honey, I know you work so we can have a future, but the future isn't always ahead. Sometimes it's right beside you and you don't see it." I folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket. Every word from Emily was like a needle sewing up the emptiness in my chest, a pain that, at the same time, was comforting. The clock struck 12. I turned on the computer. I accessed the electronic records and reviewed all the property deeds. Everything was clear. I was the only person with the power to make the final decision. Thinking about it, I sighed. Now I understood why Michael was so eager to carry out that generational transition. In his eyes, I was the barrier that stood between him and absolute power. The light flickered. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened to the rain falling outside. I remembered David's words, Emily's, and all the signs that for so long I had tried to ignore. Perhaps the time had come to stop being an indulgent father and go back to being a man who knows how to protect himself. I put away the documents, locked the drawer, and stood up to look around the room. This was where all my dreams began. Now, perhaps, it would also be the place where I would close a chapter of my life to open a new one where affection would no longer be seen as a weakness. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. It wasn't quite dawn yet. The dew still covered the window panes, and the house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock. I made myself a coffee, a habit I could never break, and sat down to look at Emily's photograph on the table. "Honey," I whispered, "I think the time has come to do something I never thought I would do." She didn't answer, but her tender smile in the photo gave me the strength I needed. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Jorge Herrera, my lawyer and the only trusted friend I had left. We had known each other since 1995, when my company had just a few employees, and Jorge was still a young lawyer. He had been by my side for every important contract and knew the legal ins and outs of this business better than anyone. When his voice came on the other end of the line, deep and familiar, I felt as if I had just grabbed onto a rope pulling me out of an abyss. "William, what a surprise. So early?" he asked, his tone a mix of cheerfulness and concern. I didn't answer right away. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I told him about the call I had overheard, about David's words, about Michael's plans to take control, and his attempt to prove I was no longer competent. On the other end, Jorge was silent. Every now and then he would ask for a detail, dates, names, and any document I had signed in recent years. When I finished, he sighed. "William, I knew this would happen sooner or later, but not like this. Your son has changed a lot." "Maybe it was my fault, Jorge," I replied quietly. "I taught him how to manage, how to win negotiations, but I forgot to teach him how to be honest." "No," he interrupted me. "This is no longer a matter of morality, but of strategy. If Michael is really trying to prove your incompetence, you have to act first. We will prepare a file to legally protect your interests, and if necessary, we can consider a more drastic measure." "More drastic?" I asked, although I already suspected the answer. "Sell the company, William. Sell everything before they can take it from you, so that you are the one who takes the initiative, not the victim." I fell silent. The idea was as painful as it was liberating. I looked around my office, at every corner, all of them linked to memories of Emily, of my youth, of the faith that Michael would continue my legacy with his heart, and not with tricks. Selling the company was like tearing out a part of my soul. But then, I remembered Linda's laughter, Michael's icy voice on the phone. That old man is useless anymore. If they saw me as old merchandise, then I would be the one to set the final price. "You have 48 hours to think about it," Jorge continued in a firm voice. "If you decide, I will take care of all the paperwork. But remember, once you sign, there is no going back." I nodded slightly, although he couldn't see me. "Thank you, Jorge. This time I won't let anyone else decide for me." After hanging up, I remained motionless for a long time. The first light of day was seeping through the crack in the door, illuminating Emily's photo. I seemed to hear her whispering voice. "If they don't know how to value it, teach them a lesson from a place of serenity." I took a sip of cold coffee, my gaze lost on the streets that were beginning to fill with life. Inside me, a plan was beginning to take shape, not out of revenge, but to reclaim what I had lost long ago, the right to be respected. That afternoon, I drove aimlessly. The road leading to the city center was crowded, but I wasn't going anywhere. Without realizing it, I turned onto a small street that led to the old park, the same place I used to take Michael when he was just 5 years old. I stopped the car and sat in silence, watching through the windshield how the almond trees cast the same shadow as they had 30 years ago. The only difference was that the boy who then ran across the grass holding my hand had become the man who had broken my heart, and now I was hearing those words again, not from the mouth of that boy, but from the wind that blew through the trees, reminding me of a distant past to which I could no longer return. I sat on an old stone bench, feeling the cold of the cement through my shirt. In front of me, a group of children were playing soccer, shouting with joy. A young father was running after his son, laughing and saying, "Be careful, you'll fall." That simple scene squeezed my chest. I had also been that father, full of enthusiasm and pride, convinced that love and responsibility would protect my family forever. I spoke to myself, in a low voice, "Michael, you were that boy. You once believed that taking care of your parents was the most sacred thing. When did you forget that?" I got no answer, only the rustling of the leaves, as if the park were trying to console me. I took Emily's small note from my pocket, the one I had been carrying with me since I opened the filing cabinet. Her soft handwriting said, "William, if one day our son gets lost, don't try to find him with reproaches. Let him get lost enough so that he understands for himself where his home is." I looked up at the grayish sky. Perhaps Emily had foreseen this too. Perhaps she understood that I needed to learn to lose in order to be able to love again, not with blind faith, but with the serenity of one who has endured everything. A child ran by, and his ball rolled to my feet. I bent down to pick it up, and returned it to him with a smile. "Thank you, sir," he said in an innocent voice. I followed him with my eyes, and, suddenly, I realized that I had just smiled for real for the first time in many days. When the sun began to set behind the trees, I stood up. I felt an emptiness inside me, but it was no longer despair, but the stillness of someone who knows that a chapter of his life is coming to an end. I headed back towards the company, thinking about Jorge's words, "You have 48 hours to decide." And in that instant, I knew I already had the answer. Not to win, but to preserve the only thing I had left, a father's honor and memories. That night, just as I got home, my phone rang. The name Sarah appeared on the screen. Just seeing it, I felt a calm wash over me. Her voice came on the other side, clear and full of concern. "Grandpa, are you okay? You seem so sad lately." I smiled slightly, trying to make my voice sound calm. "It's nothing, honey. Grandpa is just a little tired." "Are you lying?" She interrupted me immediately. "I can tell in your voice it's more than just sadness. At home, Mom and Dad won't stop whispering, and every time I walk into the room they get quiet." I fell silent. This granddaughter of mine, ever since she was little, had been as perceptive as the wind. "Have you heard anything, Sarah?" I asked gently. She hesitated for a few seconds and then confessed. "I heard Dad say you're losing your way, and that the company needs someone younger. Mom said it was time for you to retire and rest." "But Grandpa, I don't believe them." "I see you're sharp, you're just sad." Her voice trembled, and I felt my eyes fill with tears. I never imagined that, in the midst of that house full of calculations, there was still a heart so pure. "Thank you, Sarah," I said slowly. "There are things adults do that children don't always need to understand. But I'm glad to know you still trust me." "No," she replied instantly. "It's not that I trust, it's that I know. I've seen you, in your office, talking to people. You listen, you never yell at anyone. Dad, on the other hand, only knows how to give orders. You're different, Grandpa." I smiled, but my smile was mixed with tears. "Honey, your father is not a bad person. He has simply forgotten the most important thing. And what is that? That success without love means nothing." On the other end of the line, there was silence. Then Sarah sighed. "Grandpa, if I were Dad, I would never hurt you. I promise." I laughed softly. "Just saying that is enough. Just remember one thing. Adults can lose everything, but they should never lose their kindness." We talked for a while longer about school and the puppy she had just adopted. I listened to her laugh and realized that it sounded exactly like Emily's. Pure, warm, without a hint of calculation. When we hung up, I stared at the phone screen, feeling as if I had just received a balm for my soul. I got up and went out onto the porch. The night sky covered the city with an indigo cloak, and the twinkling lights seemed like countless memories. I looked up and whispered, "Do you see, Emily? In our blood, there is still a heart that knows how to love truly." The wind blew gently through the window, a caress that I felt like her tender response. I sat in the wooden chair. I opened my leather notebook and wrote, "Sarah called me today. She is a small light in a world that was being devoured by the darkness of greed. Thanks to her, I remember that not all is lost. If I can still teach something, it will be a lesson for her, that sincere love is more powerful than any contract." I closed the notebook and looked up at the company building, where the lights were still on in the night. I knew that inside, Michael and Linda were planning their next move. But in my heart, something was clear. They could have the company, but they would never take away the faith and integrity that I had passed on to the next generation. That night, I couldn't sleep. The soft ticking of the wall clock in the dark room reminded me that every second that passed brought me closer to the decision Jorge had presented to me. 48 hours to choose. I got up. I put on a robe and went out to the porch. The night city glowed, but it felt strange. In all these years, I had never contemplated it with the eyes of a man free from worries. I had always looked at it from my office window, like the guardian of the castle I had built myself, fearing that someone would come to take it from me. But today I no longer felt fear, only sadness. I have spent my whole life protecting things, and now those same things have become my chains. The light from a streetlight illuminated the photo, reflecting her tender smile. For a moment I seemed to hear her familiar voice. "You just need to hold on to your dignity, William. Everything else will work itself out." I went back into the house, opened an old closet, and took out the folder Jorge had sent me that afternoon, the company's sales dossier, the clauses, the powers of attorney, and even the draft of a letter I would leave for Michael. I put everything on the table, with trembling hands. I read each line, feeling as if I were reading my own will. Every word was cold, legal, with no room for emotion, but each one carried with it an old wound. Next to the folder, I placed Emily's notebook. I reread the last page she had written. "Honey, if one day you feel alone in the midst of your own achievements, remember that happiness is not found within the walls of a company, but in the people who still truly love you." I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. Maybe I would never work with wood again, but at least I would still be the man who had built something with his own hands. Just at midnight, I sat at the desk, turned on the lamp, and began to write. "Michael, my son, tomorrow you may be angry, you may hate me, but one day, when you have your own children, you will understand. There are things a father does not do for revenge, but to reteach the lesson you have forgotten." When I finished, I looked up. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall. The sound of the drops on the roof was constant and soft, like the quiet heartbeat of a heart that has survived half a lifetime of storms. I knew that the next day would not be easy. I knew there would be tears, anger, and even an irreparable break. But I also knew one thing. After the storm, the sun always comes out again. I turned off the light, put away the glass of whiskey, and turned to whisper to Emily, "Tomorrow I will end all this, but I will also start anew, not for the company but for myself." And as I entered my room, I felt something with total clarity. My heart, though full of scars, had finally found the peace to await the dawn of a new life. The next morning, I woke up just as the sun was peeking through the window. The first light of day cast a golden, soft glow on the wall, the color of memories. I put on the white shirt Emily had chosen for me to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the company. Over time, it had lost some of its whiteness, but it still retained the faint scent of soap that she liked so much. Today I wasn't wearing it to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I was doing the right thing. At 8 o'clock sharp, Jorge Herrera arrived. He brought a thick briefcase full of documents, and his eyes were swollen from staying up all night preparing all the paperwork. "Everything is ready, William," he said in a calm but serious voice. "Before you sign, I need you to understand that, as of today, this company will no longer belong to you. There is no going back. It cannot be undone." I nodded slightly, trying to stay calm. "I have already lost much more than that, Jorge. At least this time, I am the one who chooses how to lose it." He looked at me intently for a moment and then opened the folder. I read each clause slowly. The assignment of rights, the assets, the confidentiality agreements, and even the provisions regarding personnel. The buyer was an international conglomerate, Ramirez Corporation, contacted by Jorge himself. He was a trusted partner, willing to pay $1.2 million by immediate transfer within 48 hours. I signed each page. Each stroke of the pen was like a cut. I listened to the scratching of the pen on the paper and felt a pain in my chest, as if I were signing on my own heart. When I signed the last sheet, Jorge collected the documents gently and whispered, "It's done." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. A gentle breeze came through the window, bringing with it the song of the birds in the garden. I thought of Emily. If she were alive, she would probably be sad, but she would also understand. I had chosen to free myself, not for revenge, but to end a chain of pain. I turned to Jorge and asked him, "Do you think I was cruel?" He managed a melancholic smile. "Cruel to whom, William? To your son? Or to yourself, who has endured a lifetime without defending yourself?" I smiled slightly. "Perhaps both, but at least this time I did it for myself." Jorge put the documents in his briefcase and stood up. In the next 2 days, They will complete the transfer. I will let you know as soon as everything is ready." Before he left, he put a hand on my shoulder. "I have known you for 28 years, and this is the first time I have seen you so at peace. Surely, wherever she is, Emily is proud of you." When the door closed, I was left alone. The office was so quiet it seemed as if the whole world had stopped. I looked around. Every wall, every object, everything bore the imprint of the years I had lived. I got up and went to the window. Outside, the sun shone on the trees with a blinding light. I took a deep breath, feeling as if someone had just untied a knot in my chest. For the first time in 45 years, I was no longer the owner of Mendoza Woods. And, strangely, I didn't feel a loss. I just felt lightness. So much so that I could breathe deeply without fear of anything. I looked up at the sky and smiled to myself. "Emily, I have kept my promise. I have not let them trample on our legacy. I no longer have the company, but you still have your soul." And, for the first time in many years, I felt truly free. That afternoon, I sat in my office watching the company parking lot. The golden sun reflected off the car windows, casting the silhouettes of the people bustling below. Just at 5 o'clock, Michael's familiar black BMW entered the compound. I immediately recognized the sound of its engine, because I was the one who gave it to him for his 40th birthday. That day I told him, "I'm giving you this car not for its value, but in the hope that you will drive it with your heart, not with ambition." Now, the sound of that engine resonated like a mockery. Michael got out of the car, followed by Linda. Both looked radiant, with tanned skin after a vacation in Cancun. They were talking and laughing, without the slightest idea that their world was about to collapse. I watched them from the second floor, seeing how Linda clung to Michael's arm, her shiny hair waving in the afternoon sun, while he held his phone firmly, his eyes full of the confidence of someone who believes that tomorrow belongs to him. I didn't go out to greet them. I wanted to witness this scene as a spectator, to engrave in my memory their faces before everything changed forever. When they entered the elevator, I went back to my desk, opened the cabinet, and took out the envelope containing the copies of the company's sales contract. Jorge had warned me, "They will come with a plan to push you aside, and you will show them what it means to lose everything in a single sentence." Around 6, the phone rang. It was Michael's voice, sweet but artificial. "Dad, Linda and I wanted to invite you to dinner tomorrow. There's an important matter about the future of the company that I think you'll be happy to hear." I smiled to myself and replied calmly, "Of course, son. I also have some news to share. It will be a memorable night." Maybe he thought I already suspected his plan, because his voice faltered for a moment. "What news?" "You'll find out when you come," I said in a low voice. "Surprises are always more interesting, don't you think?" I hung up and poured myself a glass of whiskey. The evening light reflected in the glass, tinting the liquid an amber color, beautiful and bitter. I took a small sip and closed my eyes, hearing Emily's voice resonate somewhere in my mind. "William, sometimes silence is the most powerful answer." I nodded slightly, as if I were talking to her. I got up and went out into the hallway, looking at the offices that were slowly getting dark. For so many years, this place had been my entire life. I had walked these halls with pride, convinced that I was creating a legacy for my son to continue. But that legacy was no longer a gift. It had become a burden that cracked the relationship between father and son, day after day. Night fell, and the city lit up. I closed my office door, went out into the courtyard, and took a deep breath. The night wind brought with it the smell of wood from the old workshop, the most familiar scent of my life. I looked up to the second floor, where Michael and Linda were laughing in their office. Under the yellowish light, they looked like two actors, rehearsing the dialogue of a play whose ending I had already written. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "It will be the last time we speak as father and son." I squeezed the key in my hand and then let it go, with the same lightness with which I was leaving behind 45 long years. And when the car door closed behind me, I knew for sure. I was not only leaving the company, but also leaving behind the last illusions about a father's unconditional love. The next morning I arrived at the company earlier than usual. The air was cool, and the sunlight filtered through the large windows, illuminating the deserted hallways. This was not a day like any other. I knew that when the sun set, Michael's life would have changed forever. I made myself a cup of coffee, inhaled its aroma deeply, and sat at my desk. I placed the folder with the sales contract in front of me, carefully arranged by Jorge. Everything was settled. All that was left was for the new owners to take possession. I looked at the clock, 8:40. In 2 hours, it would all be officially over. At 10 to 9, the door opened. Michael entered, followed by Linda. Both were impeccably dressed, with serious faces but a contained emotion in their eyes. "Good morning, Dad," Michael said, with a somewhat forced tone. "Linda and I wanted to talk to you before the meeting." I nodded slightly and pointed to the chairs. "Sit down. I also have some things to tell you." Michael opened his briefcase and took out a stack of documents. "Dad, we've thought about it a lot. You've worked your whole life, and it's time for you to rest. The company needs a breath of fresh air. I've prepared the whole plan for a smooth transition. Of course, you'll still be the honorary chairman," Linda added, in a voice so soft it was fake. "We just want you to rest and enjoy your old age. Michael will take care of everything." I remained silent, letting them speak. Michael's voice was full of confidence, as if he were presenting a project to a partner and not to the person who gave him life. I looked at my son and no longer saw the boy who ran holding my hand through the park, but a man who had let ambition overshadow love. When they finished, I smiled. "It's a good plan," I said in a calm voice. "But before we talk about the future of the company, I have a little news to share." I took a thick envelope from the drawer and slid it gently across the table in front of them. "You should read this carefully." Michael frowned and opened it. A few seconds later, his expression went from confidence to absolute disbelief. Linda leaned over to look and gripped the edge of the paper tightly. "Dad, what is this?" I leaned back in my chair with a calm gaze. "It's the sales contract for the company. Mendoza Woods no longer belongs to me, or to you. Yesterday I signed the sale of all the shares to Ramirez Corporation." The air seemed to freeze. Michael looked at me with wide eyes, stammering. You can't have done that." "It's the family's legacy." I nodded gently. "Yes, it was the family's legacy, until you turned it into a chessboard to eliminate your own father. You were planning to declare me incompetent, right? Well, what a shame, because this mind is still lucid enough to sell everything before you could act." Linda stood up, trying to maintain her composure. "William, we can talk about this again. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." I interrupted her, in the same calm tone. "There is no misunderstanding. In fact, the representatives of the buying company are already arriving. You can stay to welcome them or go home to reorganize your lives. The choice is yours." Michael clenched his fists, trembling with rage. "You destroyed everything out of a fit of anger?" I looked him straight in the eyes and replied calmly. "No, son. I didn't do it out of anger, but out of self-respect. You could take everything I had except that." Footsteps were heard in the hallway. It was Jorge and the representatives of Ramirez Corporation. I heard each of their steps like the ticking of a clock that marked the beginning of a new era. Michael was petrified, and Linda bowed her head. I took a sip of my now cold coffee, feeling the bitterness spread across my tongue, the taste of the end, but also of freedom. "Did you want to grow up, Michael?" I said in a low voice, with no trace of anger left. "Well, today you're going to learn the first lesson of adults. Every action has its consequences." The door to the meeting room swung open. 3 men in dark suits with serious but kind faces entered. At the head was a man in his 50s, tall, with a sharp but warm gaze. He approached and extended his hand. "Mr. Mendoza, I'm Oscar Ramirez. It's an honor to finally meet you in person." I stood up and shook his hand firmly. "The honor is mine," I replied calmly. "I hope the company prospers even more under your direction." Michael and Linda looked at each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Michael's gaze jumped from me to the group of newcomers, as if searching for a crack in this nightmare. "Are you?" Michael stammered, his voice choked. "Yes," I replied. "They are the ones who bought Mendoza Woods. As of today, they are the new owners of this place." A heavy silence filled the room. Linda tried to force a smile, but her lips trembled. "William, this can surely be renegotiated, right? We could reach an agreement." I shook my head gently. "No, Linda. The contract is signed, notarized, and the transfer is complete. Everything is legal." Oscar placed his briefcase on the table and turned to Michael with a polite smile. "I assume you are Michael Mendoza. I have heard a lot about you. Your father is a man with extraordinary vision." Michael tried to stand up, but his voice broke. "Yes, but I am still the director here." Oscar looked at me and then replied softly, "I'm afraid not. With the change of ownership, the entire board of directors will be restructured. However," he paused, "if you wish to continue working with us, we could consider a suitable position for you." That sentence was a direct blow to Michael's pride. He clenched his fists tightly, his eyes reddened. "Are you offering me a job as an employee in my own father's company?" Oscar maintained his calm tone. "No, I am only offering you the opportunity to work in a business to which you have contributed. Of course, the decision is yours. I watched my son. Anger burned in him, but behind that look I saw fear, loss, and a hint of regret that he was not yet able to recognize. Linda took his hand, trying to get him to sit down, but Michael pulled away abruptly. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice broken. "What have you done? You have destroyed the future of the entire family out of sheer pride." I didn't answer, I just looked at him in silence. "You don't understand, Michael. I haven't destroyed anything. I've just reclaimed what you both threw away, respect." Linda slammed her hand on the table and hissed, "Do you want to leave us in ruins?" I managed a faint smile. "No, I just want you to learn to start from scratch, as I once did, with empty hands and a little dignity." Michael lowered his head, trembling, as his lips moved without making a sound. I saw the first tear fall from his eyes, roll down his cheek, and disappear. The scene pained my chest, but not out of regret, but out of compassion. The father in me wanted to hug him, but the man I was knew that sometimes you have to let someone hit rock bottom so they can learn to lift their head. Oscar greeted me with a nod and left the room with his legal team, leaving us alone in the silence. I looked at Michael, and in a deep, hoarse voice, I said, "Son, this is not my victory. It is a lesson for you. In life, no one truly loses everything, unless they lose themselves." I stood up, picked up a paper that had fallen on the table, the old photo of the two of us in front of the first shop. I left it in front of Michael and walked out of the room. Behind me I heard his sobs, mixed with the sound of the rain that was beginning to fall outside, the sound of a chapter that had just closed. That afternoon it poured. The rain came suddenly, with force, as if the sky wanted to wash away everything that was left of that long and chaotic day. I stood by the second-floor window, watching the drops hit the courtyard, dissolving the tire marks of the BMW that Michael had just driven away in. For a moment, I felt as if the entire company was exhaling the last breath of an era. My era. I walked slowly down the hallway, passing the offices where I used to stop every morning, where I had laughed, shouted, and taught people to work with honesty. Every wall, every door, seemed to whisper goodbye to me. When I went down to the warehouse, the intense smell of damp wood enveloped me. There, I stopped in front of an old workbench, the first one I had built with my own hands. The surface was scratched, but the saw marks were still visible. I ran my hand gently over it, feeling as if I were touching a part of my own skin. Memories flooded in, the sleepless nights, the times Emily brought me dinner, a little Michael sitting next to me, laughing out loud every time I pretended to get a splinter. I whispered, "I've lost the company, but its soul is still here. In every grain of this wood, I could no longer keep it." It had long ceased to be my company. He approached, with a mixture of surprise and compassion in his eyes. "But do you regret it?" I looked out the window, at the road that the rain was covering in white. "No, I only regret not having done it sooner." Regret? Perhaps for not having taught Michael that there are things that, once lost, cannot be bought back, like trust or a father's love. David fell silent, took his old lighter out of his pocket, lit it, and put it out. "I've worked with you for 15 years, William. I've never heard you say anything without thinking it through. But today, seeing you like this, I realize one thing. For the first time, you are no longer the boss, but a free man." I smiled slightly. "Maybe that's it, David. I've dedicated my whole life to creating, preserving, and protecting. Now I'm learning to let go." We stayed together for a while, without saying anything else. The rain fell with a steady rhythm, erasing all the sounds of the world. When David left, I looked at the workshop one last time. A few drops of water were seeping through the tin roof, falling on the cement floor, forming a small stream that slid towards the exit. I thought that, perhaps, people are like the rain. They have to fall, dissolve, to find their own way. I left the company without looking back. Under the gray rain, my shoulders felt incredibly light. I had lost everything that could be measured in money, but in return, I found something that in my entire life I had never achieved: peace. The next morning, I returned to the company one last time to collect my personal belongings. The office was strangely silent. The walls, which were once covered with awards and family photos, were now bare, showing only the marks of the nails. I put each object in a cardboard box: a few notebooks, an old fountain pen, the desk clock that Emily gave me on the 10th anniversary of the workshop. Each object was a piece of my life, and as the box filled up, I felt as if I were packing my entire youth into a small space. A soft knock sounded at the door. I turned and saw Sarah. She was soaked from the rain, hugging her thin jacket, her eyes red. "Grandpa," she called, her voice trembling. "My father told me." "Is it true that you sold the company?" I smiled sadly and nodded. "Yes, I sold it." Sarah shook her head, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Dad says you're crazy, that you destroyed the family out of pride. But I don't believe him. I know you did it for something more important." I approached and put a hand on her shoulder. "Honey, sometimes adults have to do things that others don't understand at the moment. But I'm not crazy, nor have I destroyed anything. I have simply decided to preserve the part of me that I was not willing to lose." Sarah looked up and looked me straight in her clear eyes. "Dignity, right, Grandpa?" I nodded slightly. "Yes, and also the little love I had left. You know, sometimes even love must have limits, or else it becomes a humiliation." She hugged me tightly. I felt her shoulders tremble, and the smell of her damp hair's shampoo, the same one Emily used to use, enveloped me. I stroked her hair, with a lump in my throat. "Sarah, I don't know what will happen in the future. Maybe your father will hate me forever. Maybe this family will break apart. But I want you to remember that I will never ask you to choose a side. You just need to preserve your kindness, even if the world around you changes." Sarah squeezed my hand and nodded. "Grandpa, I'm just afraid that we won't be a family anymore." Her words pierced my heart. I leaned down and looked deep into her eyes. "Honey, a real family isn't within four walls or in properties. It's here." I placed my hand on her chest, in the place where you still know how to love and trust. "As long as you love me, as long as you remember what Grandma Emily taught you, we will still be a family." She burst into tears, burying her head in my shoulder. I let her tears soak my shirt, feeling a mixture of pain and warmth. In that instant, I felt that Emily was close, smiling as she watched us. When Sarah calmed down, I gave her an old photograph. Emily, a young Michael, and me, posing in front of the first workshop. "Keep it," I told her, "so you remember that this place was born from love, not ambition." She hugged the photograph and nodded slightly. "I promise I won't let anyone forget." When she left, I followed her with my gaze through the window. Her small figure faded into the drizzle, but in my heart the light she radiated spread like the first ray of sunshine after a storm. I knew that even if Michael closed the door to his heart forever, at least in our blood there was someone left who understood that love and kindness still had a place in the world. The day I officially left the company, the sky was strangely clear. There were no more phone calls, no more endless meetings, no more inquisitive looks from others. I drove along the tree-lined road I had traveled for decades, leaving the industrial area with the lightness of someone who has lifted a 1,000-kilo weight off their shoulders. That afternoon, Jorge called me to give me the news. "All the paperwork is completed, William. The money has already been transferred to your account." I barely answered. "Thank you, my friend. Now I can finally breathe." I didn't plan to retire forever. I just wanted to live the last years of my life as a free man, without the ties of work or expectations. I contacted Elena, the real estate agent Jorge had recommended. She took me to see a house on the outskirts, 2 floors, white walls, a small backyard, and a wooden porch overlooking the mountains. Upon entering, I heard the chirping of birds and felt the smell of damp earth, the scent of real life. "Is there anything special about this house?" Elena asked me. I smiled. "Yes. It's quiet. And it doesn't remind me of the past." I bought the house that same day, without haggling. At night, when I opened the window, a cool breeze entered the room. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down to listen to the rustling of the leaves. I had spent my entire life ensuring the peace of others, but this was the first time I was living to find my own. The first day of the move, Sarah came to help me. She ran all over the garden, shouting with joy when she saw a lemon tree laden with fruit. "Grandpa, this place is beautiful. I'll help you plant more flowers, okay?" I nodded, smiling slightly. "You can do whatever you want, as long as this place is filled with laughter." She looked at me with her bright eyes and said in a low voice, "Now you really have a home, not an office." That night, we sat together on the porch, listening to the wind blow over the roof. Sarah told me about school, and I listened in silence. Her laughter echoed in the night, as clear as the music Emily loved. And I realized perhaps happiness is not found in numbers, but in simple moments like this, where you can look at someone and feel that your life has not been in vain. A week later, I received an unexpected call from Ramirez Corporation. On the other end of the line, I recognized Oscar's voice. "Mr. Mendoza, we would like to invite you to lunch. We have something important to propose to you." We met at a small restaurant downtown. Oscar looked at me with respect. We have reviewed the entire history of the company. The way you built this brand is admirable. I have a proposal. Would you like to come back, not as an owner, but as an honorary advisor? I laughed. Aren't you worried I'm too old? Oscar shook his head. No, we need your wisdom, not your youth. You understand the hearts of people, and that is something that any corporation lacks. I thought about it for a moment and nodded. I will help you, but on one condition. Treat the employees fairly. They are the true soul of the company, not the performance reports. Oscar smiled. Deal, sir. That afternoon I visited the old headquarters for the first time since I left. The new sign, Ramirez Corporation, was already hanging, bright and gleaming. Many of the old employees were still there. They ran to greet me with a mixture of joy and nostalgia in their eyes. I walked down the hallway, which was once the battlefield of ambitions, and now only evoked the breath of the past. In the office, David greeted me with a strong hug. Are you back? I smiled. Not completely. I just came to make sure this place keeps its soul. As I was leaving, Oscar called me from the door. We are thinking of creating a scholarship in Maria Mendoza's name for the employees' children. What do you think? I stopped, with a lump of emotion in my throat. I think, I said in a low voice, that Emily would be smiling. That night, back in my new house, I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange. Sarah sent me a message. Grandpa, they told me they named a scholarship after Grandma. I'm so proud of you. I just replied, No, it's Grandpa who is proud of you. That night I took out paper and my old fountain pen and placed them on the table. I had written many contracts and many letters in my life, but this time I was writing for myself. Today I turned 71. I have loved, I have lost, and I have forgiven. I once believed that my career was the proof of my worth, but I have realized that true worth lies in how we love and are loved. I sold the company not for revenge, but to preserve the soul of this family, something that money cannot buy. If one day Michael reads this letter, I hope he understands that I hold no grudge against him. I only wish that he learns that power without compassion is nothing more than an empty shell. And to you, Sarah, my dear granddaughter, if you read this, remember that love is always stronger than hate. You are the most beautiful part left in this family. Live with the heart you have given your grandfather. I put down the pen, folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and placed it next to the old photograph, Emily, Michael, and me, in a time when we were happy. I went out to the porch and looked at the sky. A soft night breeze brought the smell of damp earth and jasmine. In the firmament, the stars shone like Emily's eyes watching me. I whispered, Do you see, Emily? I have finally learned to live, not to be the owner of everything, but to be at peace. In the murmur of the wind, I seemed to hear her answer as soft as a sigh. I'm still here, William. I closed my eyes and smiled. Inside the small house, the light was still on. Outside, a new dawn was beginning to break, and I knew that although my life had reached the end of the road, in my heart, a new chapter had just truly begun. If this story has captivated you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the left of the screen. Thank you for watching.